Welcome to the China Influencer Marketing Podcast. Each week, we speak with top influencers, marketers, and brands who share their experiences, strategies, and tactics for influencer marketing in China. Here's your host, Lauren Hallanan.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 16 of the China Influencer Marketing Podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Hallanan, and that's my dog barking in the background. Today is going to be a solo show. Just want to kind of catch up. Unfortunately, last week I did not send out an episode. It was the first time since starting the podcast that I have missed a week. I've been really consistent so far and super proud of myself for being consistent. But the past 2 weeks have been a bit crazy with traveling. 2 weeks ago, I was in Miami for a China business workshop. And then right after getting back from Miami, which was wonderful, it was so nice to be in the warm weather and of course to be around other people who are interested in China and get to geek out with them. And then after I got back from Miami, I went to New York City, and I was in New York City meeting with lots of people. I was also mainly there to help out with the Luxury Conversations event about millennials, Chinese millennials, and the luxury market. It was a really great event. It was packed, and it was really great to meet lots of people interested in China. I've got to admit that since moving back to the US and being located in my hometown in upstate New York, it's really hard to find people in real life who want to talk to me about the things that I'm interested in, aka influencer marketing in China, Chinese social media. Yeah, there's not a lot of people who know about that here in upstate New York. So I love these opportunities to go meet people in real life and chat about some of my favorite topics. And I'm looking forward to more opportunities like this in the future. But for now, I will be content with hosting the podcast and all my chatting with people online and through WeChat, my virtual friends. So as I said, today is going to be a solo show covering a bunch of different topics. Since I've been traveling a lot and talking to people, there were a lot of recurring questions and themes that came up, and so I kind of want to go over those and address those, just kind of talk about some things that are on my mind. But don't worry, the interview style podcast will be back soon. I've got a couple of really great interviews that I'm working on. It's just been a little bit hard lately to pin people down, what with me traveling and then with the Chinese New Year celebrations. So I should have some really great interviews coming up soon, though. Before we dive into today's topics, I just want to give a quick shout out to the sponsor of the podcast, Parkloo. Parkloo is China's premier influencer marketing platform. Learn more at parkloo.com. And now let's get into today's topics. So the first thing that I want to address is a question that I was getting from a lot of people in Miami and New York City. People were asking me, is the influencer marketing industry still hot in China? I guess from what they were saying, it seems like influencer marketing has cooled off a little bit here in the US. That it's still very relevant in the US, and brands are still all about influencer marketing, but that initial wave of just energy, this super hot new way to promote your product or your brand. Like that kind of feeling has passed in the US, and people are kind of looking for the next big thing. Like they're still using influencers, but it's just not as popular as it was before. And so people were asking me, is that true in China? And I would say no. I think that influencer marketing, from everything that I can tell, is still huge in China, that it's only just the beginning, that prices and demand are increasing all the time. And actually, I heard a stat recently that a local consultancy an analysis has projected that the China influencer economy will be worth over 15.5 billion USD this year, in 2018. So, I don't think that influencer marketing is going anywhere in China. If anything, it's just going to keep growing and getting bigger. I think that it's just in China, so much of e-commerce, of purchasing, of marketing, it just depends on trust, and trust is a big issue in China, and influencers can provide that trust. And I also think that another huge factor contributing to the success of influencer marketing in China is that people are really overwhelmed these days with choice, and they turn to influencers to find out about the which products they should be using, which brands they should be following. They're overwhelmed, and they don't know where to turn for the right information. And they really trust these influencers to give them suggestions. And I mean, I think this is the same in the US to some extent, but I think in the US we also, we trust Google a lot more, other search engines. We can go to YouTube to look for stuff. In the US, in China, people just don't trust Baidu and search engines, the results as much, and so they really rely on word of mouth. And to them, influencers are an extension of word of mouth. It's online word of mouth. So anyway, I don't think that the influencer marketing economy is going to go down in China anytime soon. So, even if it's cooled off here a little bit in the US, I don't think that's reflective of what's going on in China. It's still very much a huge thing there. The next thing that I would like to talk about is a cool new tool that got shared with me a couple days ago, and I've played around with it, and I think it could be really helpful for some brands that are looking to get into China, or there's a lot of use cases. But this new tool is a Daigo search engine from Walk the Chat. So I'll put a link in the show notes. I think it's just daigo.walkthechat.com. But as I said, I'll put a link in the search engine. But I'll put a link in the show notes. But this tool, you can go and it's like a search engine, and specifically for Daigo, selling on Taobao. Again, if you don't know what Daigo is, we've talked about this in a lot of previous episodes. A Daigo is a someone who sells products that from outside of China and ships them into China, often baby products, healthcare products, beauty products, and luxury products are some of the most popular categories for Daigo. For example, they'll buy something in the US and ship it back to their customers in China. So oftentimes this is because the product is not available in China, or because they don't trust the source in China, and they feel like if they purchase it from the US and ship it back to China, that it'll be the real product. So there's many use cases. You can search for Daigo. But anyway, I think that this tool is really interesting because you can go in and put in the name of a brand and it will pull up the results and tell you how many sellers, like third-party sellers, are selling products from this brand on Taobao. They'll tell you their monthly sales, tell you how many products, and I think what's most interesting is that it tells you some of the most popular products from this brand that are being sold by the Daigo, and it allows you to click into those shops and see those specific shops. And I think that's a really good way. For example, if you are a foreign brand but you know that these Daigo are selling your product in China, you can search on here and then you can find specifically who are some of these stores that are selling your products, and you can learn about who are these Daigo. Because the thing about Daigo is that they often seem to kind of fly under the radar, and it's not like you can't just search for Daigo. You find out about a Daigo because your friend knows about them. So anyway, I think this new tool is worth playing around with. Go check it out. As I said, the link will be in the show notes. The next thing I want to talk about is something that I've been hearing a lot from influencers in some WeChat groups or people that I've met up with or talked to, and also just some of my own frustration. So I feel like a lot of influencers in China are becoming increasingly frustrated by Weibo and some other platforms like Meipai, who are starting to make efforts to monetize. And everyone is understanding that these platforms are wanting to monetize, but it's becoming increasingly difficult to grow audiences on these platforms. The platforms are really controlling the types of content that you can put out, and they're especially controlling anything that they feel is sponsored. So there have been issues on Weibo where people, influencers have put out a sponsored post, and if they don't go through Weibo's official Weirenwu platform to post it, that the post will get taken down. And also just that Weibo, I've talked about this before, but it's becoming such a pay to play platform. I cannot afford it. It's so expensive to get your stuff seen on Weibo these days. Unfortunately, there aren't too many alternatives, but right now, there's nothing to really replace Weibo. It's still a very important platform to be on, and it's a platform that a lot of brands want to work with influencers on. And so people are still trying to do what they can to grow their audience and to get good reach there, but it's becoming a struggle. And I know a lot of influencers who have kind of turned to Meipai as another option, and have found that they've been able to grow significant audiences on Meipai a little bit more easily than they could on Weibo. But this is changing as well now too. Meipai used to be a very open platform. You could include links to e-commerce, multiple e-commerce platforms. You could include sponsored posts and not have to do anything. You could just, it was very open. There weren't a lot of restrictions. And now, since I guess the middle of last year, the Meipai launched their I think it's just called M+, plan or Meipai plan or something, which is similar to Weibo's Wei Ren Wu, where if you're going to have a sponsored post on Meipai, you need to go through their official platform. Both the brand and the influencer need to go through this platform to register the post. And that's fine, but they're being really strict now as far as the content of videos and of your post text. And if their system seems to think that you're doing a sponsored post, that they will immediately decrease the organic reach, or I've heard just even take it down or not allow you to post it. So I've had experience with this myself. I wasn't doing a sponsored post. I was just doing a travel video. But because I was talking about this place that I was traveling to a lot, for some reason that flagged in their system that it seemed like it was a sponsored post, like an advertisement for this place. And so they decreased my organic reach. Which was a bit frustrating. There's kind of no way to tell them no, this isn't sponsored. It's just somehow their system kind of, I think, is just really sensitive to any material at this point. And I know a lot of people who had been using Meipai to drive traffic, e-commerce traffic through links, and now that seems to be really controlled a lot. Even if, for example, if you have your own store and you want to include a link to your own store, you're still going to have to use the Meipai plan or M plan, whatever it's called, to register your store as a brand and then yourself to send out a sponsored post. And I think it's okay that Meipai is trying to monetize off of these sponsored posts. I understand that, but it's just it just seems like a lot very quickly, and it's making it, again, whether it's Weibo or Meipai, it's just making it hard for the little man, the smaller micro influencers, or people who are kind of on the cusp of, and they're trying to grow. They haven't really reached that massive following yet. It's just making it a lot harder for people like us. So, I think that larger influencers who already have a significant following, they'll be affected, but they'll be okay. But I just think it's going to make it harder for new influencers to grow followings on these platforms. And it also makes it a little bit more complicated for brands to work with influencers, because they have to go through all these official platforms and systems, which I haven't used either of them, but I've heard that both Wei Ren Wu and the Meipai system can be a bit confusing. So yeah, it's looking like it might be harder for brands to kind of run influencer campaigns themselves. They might end up wanting to go through some kind of agency to run these campaigns, because the agency will be more knowledgeable about how to work with these new monetization sponsored post rules that Weibo and Meipai are putting out. Okay, and the next topic is, I guess, a little bit related to that one. Is another thing that influencers, or at least influencers that I've talked to, are a bit frustrated with. Is that it seems like in the past few months, there has been a new push by platforms for shorter content, and what seems to be trending right now is vertically shot about 15-second videos, and this trend is kind of coming off of the Musical.ly trend, which has converted into the Douyin trend. Douyin, I've talked about this before on the podcast, and I'll link to an article about it in the show notes. Douyin is the Chinese equivalent of Musical.ly, and since last summer, Douyin has become extremely popular, especially among Chinese teenagers and I guess college kids too. It's very much for that younger demographic, but because this type of lip syncing and short skits and this style video has become so popular, and Douyin is seeing so much success, a lot of other platforms are feeling like they need to also push this type of content in order to retain users and to keep them from all running over to Douyin, which is like the new big thing. And I understand that, but it's been a bit frustrating for influencers on other platforms, again, like Weibo and Meipai, and some other platforms, because these platforms are also trying to push that shorter content, and they're giving preference to that content. And it's been very difficult, I think, for some influencers and content creators to adjust. And there's nothing wrong with 15-second videos, but they're just not for everybody. And a lot of people maybe chose Weibo or Meipai as the platform they want to use because they liked the focus on photos or slightly, at least like a minute or two long videos, slightly longer form content. And now I think it's a bit frustrating to have this push for this new type of content that maybe is just not what they're into. I think that it seems like this shorter video is very popular among, as I said, younger users, but it seems like a lot of slightly older users or influencers are just not as into it. To me, it seems so far a lot of these 15-second videos that I've been seeing are really lacking originality, creativity, and substance. There are a lot of little dancey videos, and a lot of them look very similar. And I just find it, and some influencers that I've been talking to too, they're just like, I don't know how to jump onto this trend because I feel like I can't create anything of value. I can't bring any value to my audience with this format, and that they feel like it just doesn't suit them. And that's fine, right? It's just because there's a new trend doesn't mean you have to jump onto that trend, but it's just they're finding it a little bit frustrating because the platforms are prioritizing and pushing this type of content and kind of penalizing other types of content that the influencers maybe would prefer to do. So that's just been a little bit difficult and a trend that I see going on among influencers and platforms in China right now. Now I want to switch the topic a little bit and discuss live streaming in China. I've been keeping an eye on a lot of live streaming platforms lately, and I've seen that for these live streaming platforms that rely heavily on gifting, that because the live streaming industry has cooled off a little bit, it's still very important in China, but maybe it doesn't have that it's just not as hot as it was, in late 2016, early 2017. And so I see a lot of platforms adding new features that are trying to increase novelty and keep users around. So there's a lot of gamification features. We see a lot of platforms adding this feature called PK, which is PK means like two people kind of going head to head in some kind of competition. It's a slang word in China. And so PK allows two different live streamers to be in the same live streaming window together, and they compete with some kind of task, and their audience will give them gifts, and they try and win who can get the most gifts and complete the task. So this is one form of gamification. There's also some of the apps are integrating like charades and other type of games into the app itself. We also see a lot of the apps are coming out with like group streaming and group chat features where several people can live stream together in a group. Sometimes this is private, sometimes this is public. We've seen there are some apps that are integrating like radio type features where people can host a radio show and it's live. This is a good option for maybe people that kind of want to live stream but don't necessarily want to show their face. They just want to be able to talk and interact with people. Again, it's really just like a radio show. So yeah, we see a lot of these features being added to these apps, and I think that the purpose is, like I said, to retain users, keep them interested, keep the novelty, because otherwise, after a while, just this normal live streaming gets a little boring. People get tired of it. So they have to give them new reasons to keep coming back and to keep giving gifts. Another thing related to the live streaming industry is that I think that right now we might be going through another crackdown phase. I read an article recently, I can link to it as well. Just it seems like they're going through and cleaning up. It wasn't an article, it was an announcement from the government. It seems like they're going through and kind of cleaning up live streaming platforms again. And this, I don't think this is anything to be worried about. I think this happens on a pretty regular basis in China, especially since the live streaming industry started. They kind of let it run free for a little while, and then they rein it in and they clear out accounts that are making inappropriate content. So I think it's just a little phase. It'll last a little while, and then things will go back to normal. But I've seen some functions and features getting removed from platforms, and this announcement from the government said that they've shut down a lot of accounts recently, and are looking into the platforms. So just something to be aware of. The last thing I wanted to talk about for today's podcast is also related to live streaming. Is just that e-commerce live streaming is huge in China. And I have found in my discussions recently with some clients, with people that I've been meeting with, that there are still a lot of people that don't know too much about e-commerce live streaming in China. So I definitely suggest that if you are a brand, that you look into that and check it out. Primarily, we're seeing this on Taobao Live, JD Live and on Izhibo, which is Weibo's live streaming platform. I will link in the show notes to some articles about this topic. I don't want to go into it in too much detail, but it's an extremely great way to sell your product right now in China. You can either do it on your own, or there's a lot of influencers that specialize, in this e-commerce live streaming. Brands are doing really well with it. It's super hot right now. So if it's something that you don't know about or haven't looked into yet, I definitely think that more brands need to be jumping on the e-commerce live streaming bandwagon. So definitely check out the links that I'm going to post in the show notes for more information on that. Well, this episode ended up being a lot longer than I thought it would. I guess I kind of rambled on, but I hope that maybe you found some of these thoughts useful or interesting, and please feel free to send me messages on LinkedIn or leave a comment on the website. I would love to hear from you, what you think about the podcast, if there's any specific topics that you would like to see covered, and I'm always looking for guests. This is a really niche topic, and it can be difficult sometimes to find guests, especially because a lot of Chinese influencers don't speak English. So if you are a listener of the podcast and you know somebody that might be a great guest, please send me their information. It's really, really helpful. I appreciate the recommendations. I will be including links to a lot of the things that I talked about in today's podcast in the show notes and in the show description. And the show notes can be found at chinainfluencermarketing.com. Again, thank you so much for listening to the podcast. And that's all for this week. Talk to you next week.